lutar.
Lutar até o fim, sempre até o fim. Lutaremos até o fim, combatente do búfalo.
Caminho do búfalo é o verdadeiro, andando nele sempre havemos de vencer. Russos e cubanos, derrotemos já, combatente do búfalo, lutar.
Lutar até o fim, sempre até o fim. Lutaremos até o fim, combatente do búfalo.
Caminho do búfalo é o verdadeiro, andando nele sempre havemos de vencer. Russos e cubanos, derrotemos já, combatente do búfalo, lutar.
Lutar até o fim,
3-2 Battalion was forged in battle. Born out of the furnace of war. From the remnants of a leaderless, crushed army, they would become the South African Defence Force's most well-known, feared and controversial unit, and most arguably the best fighting group in the Southern Hemisphere. Whereas the majority of the South African Defence Force was only deployed on the Angolan-Namibian border to prevent the Southwest Africa People's Organization's incursions into Namibia, 3-2 Battalion was deployed and struck at the heart of the enemy inside Angola and took the fight to them, to their enemies. They were known as the Terrible Ones. This is their story. After the fall of Portuguese colonial rule in Angola in 1974, a bloody civil war broke out where three warring factions, the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, the National Front for the Liberation of Angola, FNLA, and the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA, were vying for power. As the fighting continued throughout 1975, the communist-backed MPLA drove some weaker FNLA forces towards the south. Since late 1966, SWAPO regularly launched terrorist attacks into Southwest Africa and forced the South African government's hand to deploy their defence force on the Southwest African-Angolan border. A small group of anti-communist FNLA soldiers were deployed at Mpupa, in the southeast of Angola, and it was here that they came into contact with the South African Defence Force. The men were starving, desolate, and only a few of them had weapons. They asked the South African Army to assist them in their fight for control over Angola. Despite their haggard state, most of them had been veterans of war since childhood and experts at the art of guerrilla warfare. Realizing they could have an impact on the civil war and to create a buffer from incursions by communist forces, Colonel Jan Breitenbach was tasked to train the men, and with his instructors, he tempered them into a formidable fighting machine. In October of 1975, the South African Defence Force launched Operation Savannah, South Africa's first major invasion of Angola. The FNLA soldiers, trained by Colonel Jan Breitenbach and led by South African officers, fought as Bravo Group. When Savannah ended, Colonel Breitenbach was tasked to train the former FNLA soldiers into a disciplined fighting unit. Colonel Breitenbach was ordered to bring all of the new unit's members to Namibia to train the men as members of the South African Defence Force, and thus 3-2 Battalion was born.
There was a huge onslaught and a huge threat on our northern border. Remember, at that stage, Southwest Africa, and today Namibia, was still part of South Africa. So we had to do something very quickly. And as this civil war escalated inside Angola, and as the forces started moving towards the Angolan-Namibian border, it became clear to us that the end purpose is not Angola, the end purpose is Namibia, and then later on South Africa.
It was quite obvious that communism had gained a foothold in Africa, and the domino theory was very apparent. As a soldier, I learned that you don't fight wars in your own country, you fight them in other countries. So for me, it made sense certainly to go to operation, take it to the enemy. And I'd seen enough of disasters in Africa to know that we had to fight for this one.
There was a big wall, civilian wall, in big town. From there, we came until to the border for Namibia, Kalai. We found the South African Defence Force. South African Defence Force take us until to that site, Namibia. Namibia organized us camp, refugee camp.
Me being this SO1 Ops of the Army, it was one of my duties, really, and to do the staff work to establish this unit. You must remember when I arrived as the appointed OC, there was really very little to say that it's a military unit. Because the unit was secret, the logistics, the whole setup wasn't sorted out. When I arrived there was very few vehicles, very little equipment to make war with, not enough uniforms, not enough of anything. The only things that were there, a lot of tents and a lot of food. But apart from that, there was really nothing.
The school that I went to, which was Potch Boys, had a number of former school members that were in special forces and other permanent force units. And one of these was a chap by the name of Kevin. And Kevin came to give a talk at our school in our matric year, which was 1977. And that's when I first became aware of the existence of special forces, and more specifically about the existence of 3-2. And with the inevitability of all young white South Africans having to do military service, I wanted to do military service in a specialist type of unit. And I had a preference for that to be a combat unit.
How? Because I am against communists at that time. The communists want to get inside in our country. So I'm against the communists, and then this make me to enjoy G2 Battalion.
So Major Viljoen asked me what I wanted to do there. Well, first of all, he said to me, "Where do you hear about 3-2? I said, "No, just from the troops." So he said, "Fokkie uit en gaan lees die credo." So salute, en omkeer, go out. And we had a big sign saying loyalty, justice, and regverdigheid. So anyway, I read this and I go back in there again and I salute. Now I'm 18 years of age, I'm shivering there in front of him. He says, "Now tell me now, where did you hear from 3-2? Because 3-2 at that point in time was relatively new, and it's relatively secretive at that point in time. And I said, I stuck by my story. He says, "Fokkie uit en gaan lees hom weer." So I went out there again, I read it again, and came back again. He said, "No, tell me no." So I said, "Same story." So then he said, "Okay, what do I want to do here? What have I come to do here?" I said, "Listen," I said, "I'd like to fight."
I was actually hijacked into 3-2. I didn't ask to go there. So when I went into the tea room and I met Delville Linford, I said, "Well, there I am, I've been transferred to your unit and I'm checking in, reporting." He said, "Well, I don't have a space for you at the moment, and logistic problems and getting you out into Angola where they were operating together with Bravo Group was the problem." And then Jan Breitenbach said, "Well, fine, I'll have him."
While I was doing my junior leaders course, we did a practical on the border, southwest border, for a couple of weeks. And during that period, we accidentally, not accidentally, but it wasn't planned, some of the 3-2 people came to our base. I think they came to fetch water or diesel or something. And then we were supposed to look at them, or it's very secret. But I went over and I talked to the guys, and that intrigued me. And then I started asking questions about 3-2 Battalion.
I was joined 3-2 Battalion, not to say be me by force, no, I myself to go there to join 3-2 Battalion. because I need the work. Because me, I was see other people there to join army of the battalion.
We were approached, some of our signalers, and I mean, you know, at that time 3-2 Battalion was not known at all, not even amongst the soldiers. And based on probably, you know, your effectiveness or your courses or whatever, they asked, would you join, you know, 3-2 Battalion? And obviously we were all surprised, you know, what is that?
I was in infantry school and looking at a border unit. At any of them really, largely attracted by the money more than anything else. My dad had lost his job because he was working for an American company that pulled out a year for sanctions. So I thought, hey, let me join short term, earn the extra money, go to the border to earn extra money and perhaps try and help the family. So I interviewed at the various units, and Barry Vermeulen came down to Oudtshoorn and sold the unit very well. And I thought, hey, that sounds, you're going to do something, do it properly. Go up and join 3-2.
The reason why in 3-2 Battalion myself is to fight against communists and to defend South Africa, not to be following the communists.
You must remember when General Viljoen told me he's making me the OC of 3-2 Battalion, his whole order was, Gert, go to that unit and make it a South African fighting unit. That was nothing more or less or that. So when I came there, the first thing, my first priority is to find out what exactly is going on there. First the troops, the leaders, equipment, etc., and then to the Kimberley. Because I never realized that I'm also going to get over 3,500 women and children. Also became my responsibility. Something which nobody ever taught me or any other soldier in any military course whatsoever. So after I made a complete examination of what's going on, I sat down and I made an appreciation and also a plan. How am I going to tackle this unit? Because it's not only taking a lot of troops and fight with them, deploy them in that in operations, it's to train them, to make them South African soldiers. And I had no leader element. I came there and I found that there was 9 platoons that lived in the bush with no leaders. So I had to get leaders, I had to train these young people.
Actual training of our recruits only really progressed to a more superior level once the unit had been actually established in the Caprivi at Buffalo Base.
Yeah, that was like, it was tough. It was. I nearly never made it because my stomach gave in from not eating and only drinking water. And I went to the sick bay, and they come fetch me again. They asked, "You want to go on?" I said, "I don't want to fall off." So they took me with my drip in hand. They took me back to training, and after a couple of days we were finished, and that's how it was. It was quite tough.
The selection was a little bit hard because in my training, I can remember nicely, we were 210 members, but we end up to make it only 59.
It was an extremely tough course that we had to do, selection course. Which it was a couple of days. It was about 4 or 5 days where you would actually be without food or water. We were chased, obviously, to do it in a specific time, and we were heavily laden with kit, mines, bombs, everything to load the kit. And then after the selection course, we did our foreign language course in Portuguese. And then after that, we did foreign weapons training, ranging from AK-47s, all the Russian equipment, PKM, the PPSH, RPG-7.
Pretty intense. You know, we just come out of Oudtshoorn. If you've been to infantry school, then you would sort of know what we've been through. And when we got to 3-2, it was completely different. The tactics, the training, the bushcraft, everything is totally different to what we've been trained to do in Oudtshoorn in infantry school.
Arriving at 3-2, it was sort of very difficult. You have to adapt. The general language was Portuguese, so I had to learn it very quick because we were 2 weeks in training, and after that we deployed operationally. So after that first operation, I could basically speak Portuguese or slang Portuguese when we got out.
Well, I don't think it was a matter of adapt. We just had to adapt because we were, you were one white man and 35 to 40 troops, so you just had to do it. One of the things that you've quickly had to pick up was the language. We had to manage to speak Portuguese. I was lucky that I had a person in my platoon, Jacques Alexandre, that could speak a little bit of Afrikaans because he worked on the mines in South Africa for a while. But something that I learned in those days was that the value of a sand model, to build a sand model on the ground and to show them exactly what we are going to do, where we will attack, and then take a little stick and show the man and tell him, listen, this person is you. You're going to be there on the ground, and we're going to move into that direction. And that is how I overcame the language problem.
Once you earned the respect and the leader was accepted, and there were certain obstacles and challenges that you had to bypass to be accepted by the soldiers. So that bond, it's a bond. That bond that you formed with your platoon, especially, it was almost impossible to break that bond.
It was actually very easy. It was a good relationship where we needed each other. We had respect for each other, but I'd say we probably weren't friends. You had to rule with absolute discipline. My personal feeling was the troop needed to be more scared of us than he was of the enemy, but the troops were actually much better than us in the bush. So we needed them as much as they needed us.
When I went to 3-2, we didn't know what it was. We didn't know what to expect. We didn't know we had to work with black Portuguese people. And so it was after the training, we received our platoons, and then first thing was to learn to speak their language because they couldn't speak English, or a little bit, some of them. I mean, if you couldn't speak Portuguese, you wouldn't have been able to survive. And then to learn their way and their culture. And the biggest thing was, I think, for us as white leader group was to prove yourself for the troops that they can believe in you. Because if they didn't believe in you, then they wouldn't have fight with you.
It was based on mutual respect only. If it happened where your black troop or the troops in your platoon would lose the respect for you as a leader, part of the leader group, you will be returned to your unit. You will actually be chased away out of the unit.
Because I think you wanted to be there. You adapted easily. Maybe for some people it was a challenge. Suddenly you would find, say, he's a lieutenant or he's a sergeant, but there's a black guy who is now he's platoon sergeant or more senior than him, which was a new experience for them because it wasn't that common in the rest of the SADF. But now I think after they've proven themselves, they were accepted. If you didn't prove yourself, you were not accepted by them, and they wouldn't follow your orders.
Well, in those days, C2's primary goal would have been as the primary combat unit of the South African Defence Force in the clandestine application. C2 in those days was hardly known by anybody, but they were the unit tasked with taking the war to SWAPO in Angola.
3-2's primary goal, in my mind, is that they were used inside Angola because they knew the terrain, they could speak the language, so that they could stop the enemy from entering Southwest before they could cross the border.
In the early years after its foundation, 3-2 Battalion's existence was but a whisper. According to official reports, they did not exist. Their ability to wage war against the enemy secretly and without the restraint of the rest of the South African Defence Force made them a huge asset during the war. Compact, Independent of supply and totally self-contained for survival and defence, 3-2 Battalion was the spearhead of the South African Defence Force, the hammer that crushed SWAPO, FAPLA and shamed the Cuban and Russian forces during the battle in Angola. Superbly trained in the art of bush warfare, with seasoned troops and a highly motivated leader group, 3-2 Battalion became a formidable fighting force, striking fear into the heart of its enemies. Mostly greatly outnumbered, they were unbeatable on the battlefield, even against severe odds.
And as we moved through thick bush, I saw tracks, and we started following the tracks, and the tracks became fresher and fresher, and we knew, listen, we are very close to an enemy group. And the next moment, as we got onto the top of this little high ground, the bush opened up a bit. I was at that stage the right front recce. My platoon sergeant was the left front recce, and the next moment we were in an ambush, and they started shooting at us. I went down, looked up, guy shot me over my knuckles. I shot him twice, ran forward, went down behind a bush, and as I looked up, there was a SWAPO basically from here to the camera, even a little bit closer. And he had a submachine gun in his hand, and he pushed it forward, pushed the trigger, and fortunately for me, it stopped. And as I realized he was fiddling with the stoppage, I shot him twice. And at that stage, you know, everyone was shooting over me and towards me. So I decided I'm not going to do anything more, because I was afraid that my own troops is going to shoot me. And I saw another guy on the right-hand side of me. He didn't see me, but I could see him. But I had to basically stand up, and I was afraid that if I stand up, someone is going to shoot me in my back. So as he started crawling into my arc of fire, I shot him as well. And then the contact died down. Fortunately, we didn't lose anyone. But some of our troops were so close to the enemy that they were stabbed with knives. My platoon sergeant was shot through both his arms. So we had to, I then took 2 troops and I ran back to our company base. That was about 5 kilos away, brought in a Unimog and got all the wounded on the back, and then went out to the Wambuland Cup lane, from where the Air Force evacuated us.
At about 6:15, contact commenced. That contact then went through for the entire day. I think we eventually broke off contact late afternoon, around about 4 o'clock that afternoon. In the process, we were basically on the run for the entire duration of that day. We lost a member of ours, a chap by the name of Alfredo Sondu. Sondu was shot at point blank range by an RPG. It was so close that the RPG entered his chest and exited his body without even activating the firing mechanism. That's how close he was to the shooter of the RPG. We dragged Sondu's body with us for some period of time, but the fire was so intense and the enemy contact was so close that we couldn't continue to extract Sondu's body with us. And we made a decision at a point to leave Sondu's body behind and to continue with our exfiltration. At some point in the afternoon, Defence Headquarters, I think, realised that we needed air support if we were going to be extracted safely. And I believe that the decision was taken at Bastion, South African HQ at Bastion, to call the Impalas in and to bomb a safe zone for us to break off contact with SWAPO, so that they could send the Pumas in to extract us. And I think that extraction happened around about 4 o'clock that afternoon. So we were in close contact with SWAPO for about a 10-hour conflict. Radio intercepts, I think, later showed that we had killed about the vicinity of about 20 to 23 SWAPO members, and had only lost Chisondo. I at some stage had a grenade explode above me, and still to that day I've got grenade shrapnel above my right eye here. And the bleeding was so intense that I realized that I must have been wounded in the head. But I didn't feel anything. So I was a little bit confused. I thought, maybe I'd hit my head while taking cover or something had happened. But I was bleeding so profusely that I actually had to start firing out of my left shoulder, which is in my natural firing position.
Big operations where you're flown in, put on the ground, attacked a base, flown back out again, resupplied, back on the helicopters, Puma helicopters, 4, 5, 6 of them, moved to a point, dropped down, launched another attack, and those butterfly operations were quite intensive.
On the 21st of May 1980, 3-2 Battalion attacked the heavily fortified town of Savati with an assault force of 210 men, a 26-man mortar group and 10 stopper groups of 3 men each. The base of Savati was over 1,000 men strong. It would be 3-2 Battalion's greatest battle.
The problem was that the troops were already scared. The setup of the operation was that we're going to fight this base. It's a brigade-sized base. They're not all supposed to be in the base. And we were 240 men, I think, was the total grouping, the fighting force of the... would walk in and we would take them out. On the morning of the 21st, UNITA would join us, take over the base. We would have done the operation on their behalf. They would claim the victory. We would come home. Nobody would be the wiser. So Jim and I were taking the lead. The Foxtrot company was in front, and Jim gave the command, immediate ambush to the left. I clearly remember the whole battalion going off on the left, ambush position. But as the two vehicles came closer, the troops became nervous, and they moved back and back and back further away from the road, and Jim and I followed, because we were afraid that if we stayed in front, they would shoot volleys over us to the vehicles. But at some stage, we ended up so far from the road that we could not effect the ambush anymore. So we gave the command to the troops to hold their fire, and the two of us crept forward again, leopard crawled, and waited about 10 meters from the road. So we got up, firing position, and took them out. First took the drivers out, then took the engines out and bring the trucks to a standstill in the ambush. But we then knew this operation was compromised. We had a contact a few kilometers from the base, so there was no ways that in the Savati base they would not know that we were advancing. So thereafter the troops were even more nervous. I can remember some of them openly smoking a bit of Kangonya on the way in that night, because they knew these leader group of theirs are taking them to a serious fight the next morning.
We were waiting, and a few minutes into the bombardment, I hear a very strange noise. Something like zoo, zoo, zoo. And I asked the troops, what's it? What is that noise? And then they said, it's the Monikashita. So that was now the Stalin organ. And they started the bombardment, the counter-bombardment. And that was quite intensive. And we received the order to attack 10 o'clock, as far as I can remember it. But the fire was immense. I never experienced anything like that. We moved forward, Alpha Company, and Dave Hodgson on the left side, myself on the right-hand side, Dave next to the runway. But everything, as far as to my understanding, it was in order. Charles Miller, our company commander, was a very proficient officer, and he was so relaxed. It's like, he said, all stations down, and then when the fire was too intense, and then we shoot back, and the normal drills, we practice it over and over and over before any ops, every ops, and then as soon as you start shooting back, lying down, the fire lift, and then Charles Miller said, all stations forward, but so relaxed. And then I said, but this is a guy not panicking, he's on top of his game, and we attacked. And at one stage, I hear an enormous explosion next to me. And we all took dekking, And Charles Miller said all stations forward, carry on with the attack. But unknown to me, one of my troops was killed in that explosion. He was just next to me.
So we knew we were in for a fight. We walked over Jim Rosgrave, final orders, and I remember Heinz Miller, the other platoon commander, saying to me, if you get a Tokarev, get one for me too. This thing was on. Who's going to get the first Tokarev out of this contact? So we went back to base, back to our positions, and early in the morning, we get the command. Now, I remember some of these things vividly. I think it's burnt into the mind with adrenaline and whatever. I remember Colonel Ferreira coming up on the radio, say, guys, stand up, move to contact. Now, for a young second lieutenant, this is what he's wanted to do all the time, to make big contact. We've had a few small contacts since joining, but now this is a big war. And we hadn't moved 200-300 meters. We were in contact. Now, although the base was only supposed to be 1.5 kilometers from there, the main trenches, we were fighting from the first moment because they had foxholes outside of the base. So every foxhole was a fight. We had to take that way and actually kill that guy before we could move on. So we expended ammunition at a rate like nothing before. I remember I had carried the R1. I never believed in an AK. I wanted firepower. I carried 10 magazines and 5 spare boxes of ammunition. And I had shot out my last magazine and the hand grips of my R1 had melted off. I held it with my bush hat before we even saw the trenches.
They definitely knew that someone was coming and they had prepared for us. That morning at about 9 o'clock, I think everybody was in position. The bombardment from our 81mm mortars that was on the southern side of Savati, they bombarded the base. And at a stage, I think it was about 9:30, Falcon gave the command that all the companies should move forward and start with the attack. As I said, we were on the northern part of the airstrip, my 2 platoons and myself. We were in the normal attack formation that we used, a stretched out line, and we moved very cautiously. The trees, there wasn't much cover. There were thin trees and small bushes all along the route. And although we couldn't see very far, you could see about maybe 50 to 100 meters in front of you. We were advancing very carefully and slowly in the normal manner when suddenly we drew fire. Okay, we went over in the normal fire and movement mode where we do buddy-buddy, and I could hear the platoons. I was in the center of the 2 platoons. I could hear them calling and doing the normal shouting, you know, moving forward. And we had advanced about, I would say, around about 100 meters or so, when the platoon commanders reported to me on the radio that they already had encountered some casualties. I told the people to stop the advance and that we just could have a look, because at that stage we still haven't seen or encountered the enemy on face value. We couldn't see them, but there was a lot of firing. I then realized, and we then realized, that there was much bigger weapons being used against us than the normal machine guns and AK-47s. We realized it should have been, or it must have been, 14.5s that were being used in the ground roll. As you could see, that the trees and the small trees next to us, they were just chopped down in size. So as I said, we still couldn't see. We still hadn't seen the enemy or their trenches at that stage. I think there was about 4 or 5 of the troops, of my troops, that were already had injuries. Fortunately, not one of them had died at that stage yet. I wanted to report to Falcon the situation, to tell him that our advance was being hampered by heavy caliber weapons, but I couldn't get hold of him on the radio. They had already started the main attack on the southern side of the airstrip, and I think he was involved because he had a radio that could talk to the companies, and he had a ground air radio with him, and I think with all the noise and everything, he didn't hear me.
The actual bombardment, it was 81 mm mortars. They weren't allowed any air support, except for hot extraction for casualties and that type of thing. So we didn't have any air support. With a big operation like that, you probably have a lot of air support and bombarding and all that sort of stuff prior to actually the ground forces going in. And with us, we just had 81 mm mortars, and we carried a lot of ammo. We were heavy. Also carried mortars as well to help with the mortars, which we dropped off prior to us going north when the companies were all getting into their positions. We still had to walk a couple of kilometers further north to put up our stopper groups and that.
Yeah, and then the fight actually started, and the noise, I'll never forget the noise. It was just something indescribable of 15 to 2,000 semi-automatic rifles firing at once, and that, I think, is what took us by surprise, because as a battalion we mostly focused on guerrilla warfare and small skirmishes, anywhere from up against three terrorists up to 30. It was that sort of scale. Suddenly we were up against, at the time we thought it was 250, but turned out that it was over 1,000.
I remember that at some stage I had to abandon my R1, sling it across my shoulder, and I got an RPD that somebody had shot at me with, and I had gone behind a Mopani tree and I'd waited for him to shoot again. I took him out and then I recovered his weapon, and so did many of the troops. They had AKs and RPDs and whatever we picked up as we went along. That's how we made it. And then we came to the trenches, and Colonel Ferreira once again said, "All right, guys, final assault." So we just stood up and we just advanced. Opened fire with what we had and advanced. And that stage, the enemy got up and ran away. I don't think they could believe what was happening to them. Willem Ratte the previous night had reported to the colonel, it's not only a battalion in the base, the full brigade is here, 1,600 men, dug in with some PT-76s, with 14.5s, 23 mils, Katusha rockets. They were ready for this. And because of the contact the previous night, they surely knew that we were coming. So they were in full defensive positions. We did not surprise them. The mortar started firing, but I think they fired maybe 10 rounds when the 122s actually forced our mortars to redeploy. So when we went in for the main attack, we had no mortar support that I can remember. There were no Impalas, no gunships, just a few troops on the ground. Now I remember Foxtrot Company went quite well, and Charlie was taking the hammering at the time. I remember Sam calling in and saying that his company is being decimated on the runway by the 14.5s. They were attacking over the open and they were being shot to pieces. Foxtrot had it easier at that moment. So we attacked, cleaned trenches, cleaned bunkers, recovered weapons and ammunition until the enemy then fled to the north. We took the base, and as we relaxed, started treating our wounded, I went back. The first guy I fought, what I found was Heinz Miller. Hans was the other lieutenant, and he was shot in the stomach with a machine gun. And I said, Hans, vastbyt, they'll be here now. I haven't found us a tokkeref net, and he was already far gone, losing blood. And he just fell asleep and came to, and the medic tried to put a drip on him. He couldn't find the veins. There were no helicopters for evacuation, and Heinz just fell asleep. So I knew we had lost him, gone.
There was someone killed, he burnt out. And I walked towards the body, and there's no way you can recognize. It was impossible to say whether it was a black guy or a white guy. So it transpired that he carried a white phos grenade in his webbing here. If he didn't had it here, it would have been a shoulder wound, and he would have survived. And we ourselves, the old guys, never wear a white phos in front of us for that very reason. So, and then we start getting all the wounded, had a head count, how many people are still alive with us, our troops, did roll calls, and we start counting the bodies of Fapla.
And at that moment, we realized that there's a bigger problem here. The enemy hadn't run away. They had circled around from the north behind us, and they now attacked the base. So we fought out of the trenches, back to chase the enemy again. The enemy was now attacking us in their base. So the rest of the day we spent fighting outwards. And then they actually ran away. And then we came back to the base again. Late afternoon, here by 3 o'clock. Then the Bosbok came around with the 2IC of the unit, Major Eddie Viljoen, and said, but the enemy is running north, and the recce groups were reporting that they are having contact with masses of enemy that were now just overrunning their positions.
What happened was a whole column broke away and started coming towards our position. Just myself and Fritz and my machine gunner, Alberto. And our machine gunner, Alberto, was shot fairly early in the firefight, so we didn't have any real machine gun cover. It was just Fritzie and I. Fritzie had the Snortnest, which was the M71. Snortnest little grenade launcher, and he was firing that, and I was firing the AK. And I remember we were underneath a tree, and the river was directly on the side here. It's almost like an embankment so we were a bit sheltered. But from all the bullets and the ricochet and everything, it was like rain, just all branches and leaves and everything falling down on us. And I contemplated on maybe even getting into the river at one point in time, because I thought, no, there's no ways that we're going to survive this.
At a stage, we came under the impression that the one company commander of Alpha Company, Charles Muller, might have been captured by FAPLA forces. At that stage, it was in the later part of the afternoon. FAPLA was withdrawing with vehicles as well as on foot. We knew that our recce stopper groups were deployed on the northern part or the northern side of Savati along the road and towards the river as well, so that we were not too worried about the vehicles getting away. But it was a great force. Falcon gave the instruction that we had 4 buffels on our force, that the 4 buffels must move forward and that we should follow up on the column that was fleeing in a northwards position. I know that Falcon was in one buffel. I think some Major Ickerman was with him. I was in a second buffel, and then Jim Ross, the company commander of Foxtrot Company, was in another buffel.
We were stopper groups, about three man guys, 3-man stopper groups, about 300 to 500 meters apart at the northern side of the base. We laid a big vehicle ambush on the road with quite a big group of guys, but unfortunately the guys didn't use the road. They flew with the vehicles through the Shana. Luckily we had rocket launchers, to stop them and so on. So we shot out quite a couple of vehicles in that incident.
We went into a formation, a spread out formation from the road towards the river on the floodplain, and we moved northwards. There was also an Alouette gunship on the northern side that we could hear him firing on the vehicles as well as the recces that was deployed there. They were cutting off the stopper groups. On the floodplains itself, I was the buffel in the center there. I think Jim Ross was on the river side. I was more to the center, and Falcon on the road. But we could see hundreds and hundreds of FAPLA trying to flee. They didn't want to stay on the roads. I think that's the people, or they might have got off the vehicles when the vehicles were ambushed by the recces. But we just saw hundreds of people running towards the river and running towards the north, and also trying to hide in the grass. And that is where we really encountered, I would call it a duck shoot. We were in the vehicles, the people were running next to the vehicles or hiding in the grass, and we were just shooting the FAPLAs as they were running. Nobody was firing back at us. I think they were just trying to get away from us. There was an incident. We all had machine guns mounted on our Buffles, Brownings. Later on, their ammunition was finished. We all had all AKs or FNs with us, and our ammunition was finished. So as soon as you shot someone, you jump off, you take his weapon and his ammunition, and we'd have ammunition again. And we were driving around there and shooting until Falcon told us that they had found Charles Miller. He was found in a trench. He had been killed.
Now, Charles, I spoke to one of my troops. He was wounded, and I only spoke to him after the ops, a few months later, and I asked him what happened. And then he said, well, you know, Charles was wounded in the hand, and as he jumped over a fence, someone tried to grab him, and he tried to get away, and the person shot him, and that is how Charles Miller was killed. Unfortunately, we were never trained for battles like that. We were light infantry. We were trained in guerrilla warfare. That was the job for a mechanized battalion, not infantry like us. We never really practiced how to clear trench systems and bunkers. Rod Aaron, who came from the RLI, who joined us, he actually, in the middle of the battle, he was clearing trenches, he was clearing bunkers, you're throwing hand grenades. And something that at that stage we never practiced.
That's Savati for me. I realized that day when I stood by Heinz that I was not a boy anymore. That day, I had become a man.
.32 Battalion suffered 15 fatalities during the battle and 26 wounded. The People's Armed Forces for the Liberation of Angola, FAPLA, later confirmed that they had suffered 558 casualties. On the 13th of June 1982, .32 Battalion launched a surprise attack on a 300-man strong SWAPO base with a 46-man assault force, 22-man strong stopper group, a 12-man mortar group and 4 gunships from the South African Air Force. Although the enemy were caught off guard, the unit was heavily outnumbered, and it would take a full 10-hour full-scale firefight to get the enemy out of their base.
Super wasn't planned. It wasn't a planned operation in the conventional way that normally we would plan an operation. Long before the time, there's a process that starts of appreciation, military appreciation, intelligence gathering, plans that's made and presented, new plans people send back. It didn't happen for us in .32 Battalion like that. Yes, there was already something going on that we didn't know of the reconnaissance phase by Special Forces 5 Reconnaissance Command. We were not aware about that, and it should be, and that's the way that it was. So it was never planned. It came as a, call it a surprise.
And once we had the information of the big base, they started flying in fuel and started to bring companies in that were starting to come into the bush to do their bush trip. So that was the planning phase. While they were doing that, the planning, we were just waiting to get orders to do the base attack. Then on the Friday, the attack was meant to take place on the base, but due to heavy rain, we had to abort the operation. We flew back and it was aborted. So they went back to the planning phase to see if we were going to take it, go back in the morning.
But there wasn't many people that partook in it, so it wasn't planned. And when I only got on the ground in the Marienvloes, was I briefed by the people busy just with the reconnaissance that there's something here.
When we went back on Saturday the 13th, when we flew over the base, we were actually caught them with their pens down because everything was drying outside. And that, so it was a bit of an elephant or surprise, which helped us because of the rain the day before, which helped us in a big way. We hit contact early in the morning, first thing.
After we left Marienvloes, the choppers took us across the mountains, over the mountains, and we went to to where the base was, or the sort of tactical base, temporary base. And we landed. At that stage, the 4 gunships were circling above the base. And yeah, we got dropped off, and the Pumas left. And then it was quite a lot of chaos, because to organize your troops and to get them all together and to know which way to go, which way to attack, which way the attack is coming from, because you don't know the area. And it was very mountain and rocky and all that. So after a bit of screaming and shouting, we got everybody lined up, and the 2 platoons, which was Alpha Company, which was our platoon, J.C. Kerstein and myself and Philip Stewart, and then Kenneth Swart and Louis Lombard, they were in the Foxtrot Company, and that was the front line. That was the attack platoon. So I think we were about 46 people.
Yeah, there wasn't a base as such. There were people all around. There weren't any trenches. They had vehicles that obviously got away at some point, because the munition must have got there with the vehicle. But there wasn't a physical base as such. The guys were lying under the trees and just sleeping almost in a temporary type base.
As we got dropped, we immediately drew fire. There were some SAM 7s fired at the gunships that was above the base, and lots of mortars that was fired at us, and we also obviously answered with mortar fire back, with small mortars, 60 millimeters. And then we started moving forward, slowly but surely, and we were still quite away from the base when I think where we were offloaded was maybe between 1 kilometer and maybe 1.5 kilometers away from the base, where they actually were. And we moved very slowly in the beginning until the troops got lined up. And what was very good was that the helicopters could see us in the inside of our bush hats. We had a piece of day glow stitched in, and that made it very easy for the choppers to see us, and they could tell us when we were moving too fast, maybe in the middle or on the left or on the right. And we were all the time in radio contact with everybody, so we knew exactly what to do when, and to keep the troops controlled, that they don't run in front of each other. As I said, the terrain was just very, very difficult. I think it was still in the early hours that Philip Stewart got shot, our corporal, and that was quite dramatic, because JC went to him, and JC thought he was still alive. And when Neil Ellis asked, is he alive? And JC said, yes, I think he's still alive. But he was shot twice through the head, so I'm not sure that but anyhow, so they landed in that fire and took him out. And well, obviously when they got out, they realized that he was dead. And then the fight continued, and later on one of the black troops was shot from Foxtrot Company, from Blackie and Louis. Also in the head, and we had no injuries at all on our side. And while the fight was going on, Peter Burley and Farnes Nel was picked up where they were from the previous night, where they were lying a stopper on a road in case they was going to leave at night with vehicles. When we arrived there were no vehicles, so obviously the vehicles left before they were there. And yeah, then they were taken to, on the right, more to the right-hand side of the base. There was like a sort of a valley that was going up, a dry riverbed, and the river split it. So they dropped Peter in the one dry riverbed, and Farnes was taken up a little bit higher on the other side, and it was sort of an escape route for a lot of the SWAPO guys, and they ran into Peter and into Farnes, and so that was quite easy to get those guys on that side. And then the mortars were on the far right, on top of a hill. We didn't know exactly where they were. We couldn't see them, but yeah, so they were firing from there when they were asked to fire, because they couldn't fire while the fight was going on, obviously, because the helicopters was there.
The gunships played a major role. Without them, maybe the operation would have been different. If you talk, it's a gunship, but it's the pilots and the engineers, the gunners who fly them and operate them. With people that we worked with over many years and knew very well personally and done many operations with, like Neil Ellis, and there's many others of them. It was mountainous area, and normally it makes it difficult for you to control your troops on the ground, but because of their experience working with us, you could, to a great extent, they were an extension of your command and could make decisions for you where you couldn't see, or make a decision because you trust them and they know what was best. So they played an absolute major role. I think without them it could have been maybe a messy situation.
We continued fighting. It never stopped. We started at between 7 and 8 o'clock, somewhere there. We were dropped off, and it just continued, and there was no sort of calm down time. It was just non-stop. And as we were running out of ammunition, what made it very easy, we used the same guns, the AK-47 that Swapo was using. So we could just take the dead bodies that was lying as we were going past them, just take their magazines, and then we had ammo again.
Then one of my corporals got shot, got a headshot between his eyes, Lobija, and Louis called me and said he's been wounded, so I went to his flank where he was to see what the situation was, and when I got there he was dead. So there was nothing more we could do with Yorbi, so we just kept on moving forward. And on my way back to my flank where I was, we had been sweeping through the area, and there was a Swapo guy that had pretended he was dead. And we had passed him already, and then he was busy leopard crawling back to where my machine gunner was, towards him. And fortunately I came behind him, and then I took care of that problem, and we could move on again. We had the fight started at 8, it was the whole day till about 3:30. Eventually we got through the contact area, and then we could do a bit of clearance, go back and pick up weapons and ammunition. But we were picking up little contacts all the time, the whole day. And then Nella came in with his platoon as a stopper groups, and then he got shot in 2 ravines, but the terrain there was hectic, it was very rocky, and so because of that Nella got shot there, and Sergeant Dracula, his sergeant, and another trooper, I think he could have been a lance corporal, Bernardo, they went and picked up his body and brought him back. But at that stage, Sergeant Dracula, he was just shouting on the radio, please send us a white leader group guy, and he was a sergeant. He panicked, and then little Doopy, fat Doopy, he took over and calmed him down and said, Dracula, relax, we'll get somebody to you. And then Peter Burley, Nella's second in command, got there and took over control, and the situation stabilized again.
It was like any other operation, but different in the way that you felt there's something bigger here, but you don't have all the resources that you would normally have if you had the time to plan. But personally, that stands out for me was the dedication and the professionalism.
3-2 Battalion suffered 3 casualties during the conflict. Swapo suffered close to 200 casualties. A massive cache of weapons was seized by the unit.
They attacked, and the first shots that were fired was their 57mm cannon, RPGs and everything else that they had. And the first shot that came as myself and Jim was already lying in the trench, hit my rucksack. My Sheila that was standing upright next to the trench. Now in it was grenades and phosphor grenades and stuff like that. And obviously this made a lovely fireworks. Obviously when it exploded, both of us got wounded there in the trench. Jim more seriously than I did. This made a lovely big fire, so they could concentrate all their fire on this burning machila, sleeping bags, and. So the fire was quite concentrated, heavy, and then myself and Jim tried to put out the fire, stupid, under this heavy fire. We eventually went back and we sat, that whole night we sat in the 82mm mortar hole which they have dug for the 81s. And the 5.5s, the 5.5 cannons were also deployed behind us. They fired a few shots and then SWAPO dispersed. Now we had the tracks, we could go. However, the next morning myself and Jim was casevaced. We basically only had our clothes on, the rest of the equipment was burned. The weapons, our weapons were buggered. So all this equipment and ourselves were loaded into the Puma, and we were flown back to Ilundu, Inanna. Jim was flown up to Oshakati, and I think from there he went to 1 mil. He was wounded in his hand. I just had a lot of shrapnel in my head. I deployed back to the field 2 days later, where we continued with this operation, which is another story. What happened then, apparently the medics picked up in Oshakati, saw this equipment, and our names were written on this equipment. And they saw the names, the number and everything, and they thought these two guys are dead. They must be dead. Jim was a candidate officer at that time. I was still a lance corporal on paper. And not long after, somebody phoned from South Africa, Johan Smith. He was wounded at the time. He was in one military hospital recovering from another operation. And he said that both of us have been declared dead. It is in the state newspaper. Even our names were put at Fort Klapperkop, CO J.G. Ross, Lance Corporal B.D. Vermeulen. Our names were engraved in Fort Klapperkop in the monument.
And on that stage, something just triggered me, and I said to them, let's get out of here, something is not right. And as I turned around, I could remember that I turned around, obviously what happened. One of them lifted the bag or shifted the bag, and there was a lifting device on it, and that whole cache exploded. Well, on that stage, I was, everything is dark, black. And what have happened, I was waiting. When I, obviously, in that explosion, we all were most probably unconscious. And as I came by, I recall the happenings, and then I realized, okay, you're dead. Because everything was black, can't move, no pain, no nothing, can't hear anything, just a singing sound. Then I waited. And that was most probably one of the longest times of my life waiting for something. Basically, none of the guys that was in the unit were angels. So in that stage, it's reality. So you're waiting. So you don't know who's going to come and fetch you. Is it God or is it devil? So that's the thing that going through your mind the whole time, waiting, no one comes, and then you could start feeling the pain, that immense burning pain. Everything was pain. Couldn't see, start to feel around, couldn't move. So eventually I got my one shoulder arm sort of out and could feel big stumps on top of me. I had the air pocket where I could breathe. I couldn't hear anything. It was just this singing sound the whole time. And it's like being under the water. You don't know where's up or down. And then I could feel sand and falling on top of me. So I knew basically where it was up. And then I realized, okay, right, we're down the cache, there was an explosion, you're trapped. Let's see if you can get out of here. So I started to dig out the whole time, the sand tumbling in on top of your head again, in your mouth, in your nostrils, the pain. So eventually one hand was sort of free, and then I could feel someone grab me on the outside, my hand. So they pulled me out. That was the rest of the team that was still on the outside. So they pulled me out, couldn't see anything. The only thing that I could scream the whole time was agua, 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 water, 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 just to get rid of that pain and burning. So the medics patched me up. Couldn't see anything. You're blinded, can't hear anything. Then the decision was made, we've still got 2 guys trapped on the inside. I had 2 Sozigons in, that was a pain stiller that we carried with us. I had 2 or 3 of them that the guys injected me with. So I decided to go back and get the other 2, Andrew and Bernardo, see if I can get them out. One of the corporals that I've got, Dalmeida, he said to me, don't do it. They'll get help. But I went back. They helped me up to where I got out. Then I obviously couldn't see anything. Went back, feeling way the whole time. Got hold of a boot. That was Bernardo's boot, but there wasn't a body on it. So eventually I got him out. He made some sounds. I couldn't see him. And I could just hear what the other people, the hearing starting to come back, but still the pain in the ears of eardrums were burst. Then I went back and got Andrew out. Simultaneously on that time when they reported it, basically the whole leader group was taken out. But the guys had good experience. Everyone could do the job. The platoon sergeant that we had, he made comms, and there was a reconnaissance team in that area that was a very short distance from there, that was busy trooping in on another operation. And they flew in and they landed, and can't recall the name of, I've met him later, it was a captain that was one of the reconnaissance operators. He took control over it. And they bandaged us up. Got a Puma helicopter in to transport us out to, I presume, Oshikati, with medical doctors on board. Directly from there, I think within a day or something, or the next night, we arrived at one military hospital. And that is where I could take the one patch. I tried to see what's going on the whole time. So you could see faintly what's going on. It was still blurry and everything. And I saw Bernardo, and he wasn't looking good. There was no face anymore. It looked like a sponge. Andrew, I was with him I talked with him. And that night, he was transferred to Cape Town Hospital. His dad was a medical doctor or something. And he was transferred to Cape Town. I didn't see him again. I only know that in '94 sometime, I was watching a program and these people came up and talked about Andrew, and then I later found out that, well, he couldn't really cope with it. He lost a lot of his sight, recovered some of it later on, but he was badly scarred. And he decided to end his life. With Bernardo, I visited him once or twice in the hospital. He couldn't breathe, there was no face. He couldn't breathe, he had pipes in his throat that he breathed through. And as far as I know, I went back to the unit. After I recovered, I went back to the unit. And I know sometime during that time, he also ended his life. I don't know how, but I just got the word that he's not with us anymore.
I think 3-2 was successful because it was a professional unit. The soldiers were soldiers most of their life. The leadership group was volunteers, and I think a volunteer's heart is stronger than a person that's forced to go there. The training, I think, was excellent training, excellent equipment, and people wanted to be there.
We never, my good remember, we never leave our body in the ground. If you get shot, you die, we pick you up, bring you back to South Africa.
In terms of what I've learned lately, working with the Americans and Canadians and guys out in Afghanistan, where they talk about this concept of black ops, we were a unit that didn't exist. So we were expendables in a sense, because we didn't exist, and we could do a job which the normal South African soldiers were not allowed to do.
With every operation, the troops learned something, and you gained more experience. With that experience, the platoons, the companies, the battalion became more effective, much more effective. When you consider that they were at war for almost 20 years, say from 75, 80, almost 20 years before they got disbanded, that amount of experience gained is far superior than any training you could receive, because that is hardcore combat experience, and that's what welded the unit together.
They weren't constricted like a lot of the military is. They were innovative. They took the battle to the enemy. They marched to the sound of the guns, as it were.
I think it's because we were a brotherhood. Us and the troops, we clicked and we respected each other, and you went out of your way for your buddies and your co-soldiers. We were a very, very big brotherhood.
I think because of the experience of the black guys, we must look a bit further. When I, for instance, joined the unit as a 18-year-old, say, kid, that was my troops. They were soldiers for 20 years and more. So they taught me how to fight bush war. And as soon as you earn their respect, then you can move the world with them.
In 1989, 3-2 Battalion was relocated to the old mining town of Pomfret in South Africa, and all the Portuguese soldiers were given South African citizenship. Their roles suddenly changed from bush warfare to being tasked to patrol the burning townships less than a month after relocation, where the African National Congress and the Inkatha Freedom Party members were slaughtering each other in record numbers. It would become the end of an era.
A woman was killed and about 100 people were injured when members of the battalion allegedly went on the rampage. The SADF says it began shooting in self-defense. This report by Jessica Pitchford and cameraman Stan Sikakane.
Residents of Pola Park say the attack came shortly after 9 o'clock last night and lasted till the early hours of this morning. According to the SADF, soldiers were patrolling the area when they were fired at, and a member of 3-2 Battalion was wounded. They then returned fire. This morning, the body of this woman was discovered in her shack. Countless others were wounded.
I found this
black Kufu guys picking up some empty cartridges. After that, they started smoking everybody on the street.
The occupant of this shack, which came under fire, says he was hit on the head with the butt of a rifle. These men claim they were beaten up after being dragged from their homes.
Black soldiers.
There were also allegations of rape. Later in the day, an ANC delegation visited Pola Park and called for the expulsion of 3-2 Battalion from South Africa.
Zip Kusel and defend yourselves, Pola Park. Say banana.
After addressing residents, the delegation met senior officials of the battalion.
Do not blame us. If some of these cowardly elements hide in the masses in Pola Park, opening fire on us, people getting hurt, now putting the blame on our shoulders.
To our disappointment, you have immediately taken a defense. Defense to say that you had the right to shoot those injured people. They are women. It does not happen to your people.
Gister het die staatspresident, meneer F.W. de Klerk, bekendgemaak dat die omstrede 3-2 Battalion van die Weermag, tesame met die eenheid vir Boesmans, 3-1 Battalion en die oud-polisie-eenheid Koevoet ontbind gaan word. 3-2 Battalion was alweer beskou as een van die mees gedigte gevegseenhede nog in die Weermag.
Waar 3-2 Battalion by sy nuwe basis op Pomfret in die Noord-Kaap wag om te hoor wat sy ontbinding presies gaan behels, hoop die meeste swart Portugese soldate om hulle werk in die Suid-Afrikaanse weermag te behou. Die meeste van hulle ken niks anders as 'n militêre milieu nie. En soos met die oud SAP-eenheid Koevoet, is die lede van 3-2 Battalion grootliks van die veiligheidsmagte afhanklik vir hul voortbestaan.
You wouldn't like to go back to Angola?
Well, I should like to go there just to go and visit my family and come back. You see, as I'm now South African citizen, so I would like to stay in this country.
Ben in 81 ek het in Weermag gegaan tot vandaag, maar ek voel alright in Weermag.
I haven't got any planning to go back to Angola because I haven't got any future. I think I got a few of my family here, my child here, and all of them they're born in South Africa. So I haven't got any plan, as I've said, to go back to Angola.
Oor hoe presies 3-2 Battalion ontbind gaan word, is daar nog onduidelikheid. Maar in amptelike kringe word daar van rasionalisering en reorganisasie gepraat. Die weermag sal waarskynlik in die komende dae en weke besluit wat die ontbinding gaan behels. Maar as die SAW hom wil bepaal by die aanbevelings van regter Goldstone, sal hy waarskynlik probeer om die kohesie van 3-2 Battalion geheel en al tot op individuele vlak af te breek.
3-2 Battalion has been officially disbanded. Richard Newton reports that both for present and past members of the unit, it was an emotional occasion.
It was at 3-2 Battalion's base at Pomfret in the Northern Cape that the unit, arguably the most well-known and successful unit to serve South Africa during the Bush War, was officially disbanded. The parade was a sad event for the thousands of present as well as past members of 3-2 Battalion. This much-feared unit came into being in 1975 as a result of the Angolan Civil War, and many of its members came from the FNLA resistance movement. The unit built up its reputation for success in conventional and unconventional operations in Southwest Africa and Southern Angola. With South Africa's withdrawal, the battalion was resettled with their families at Pomfret and deployed in rural areas. Members of this proud unit will now be transferred to other units within the South African Defence Force. According to General Mayron, these units that receive 3-2 members can only benefit from their experience. The base town of Pomfret, which currently houses 6,000 people, will be retained by the Defence Force. Past and present members of the unit, however, feel sold out by what they call the politically motivated destruction of the best unit in the Southern Hemisphere. None feel stronger than the man who founded the unit and trained its first members, Colonel Jan Breitenbach.
I feel we've been betrayed, let down, because the politicians were using this unit's political power. And I don't think it's right, because they bled for this country.
And this backstabbing of what went on there is disgusting, unacceptable, and the politicians and the generals are to blame for what went down. If they had not have disbanded that unit and fragmented it all over the country, to the point where last week my platoon sergeant died, didn't get much help from the SADF. We had a guy die this week, and he didn't have enough money to bury himself, which we are now putting money in to bury this guy. and been dumped at Pomfret, scattered about all over the country because they were regarded as a threat to the ANC. They were the first unit that got folded, and actually the only one, to my knowledge, because of the fact they were the terrible ones and of our combat history and experience.
They were very sad. I mean, 3-2 was their life. All of them were very, very upset. They didn't know what was going to happen to them, money-wise, living conditions, because they were not very welcome in the new South Africa. So all of them had bad feelings about the whole thing, which is understandable. I mean, we brought them over from Angola, made them South African citizens, and basically left them.
It was like a funeral. I didn't attend it. I don't like to attend funerals. But it was something that wouldn't have fit in the new era, in the new South Africa. So at the end of the day, it was unfair. It was a sellout. Politicians, previous years, they did their secret security meetings and conferences at Buffalo Base. And after that, that same politicians sold out 3-2 Battalion and disbanded the unit for their own political benefit.
As you can see here, this place was created as a 32 Battalion Association. But look at the place where it is. And it's supposed to be one of a beautiful place, a history place. But we feel very abandoned. Definitely, we feel very abandoned. And you know, some of us, we are lucky, we got part-time jobs, we are doing well, we understand how to handle some security jobs. But some of them, they are not doing well.
And when the disbandment came, it was a big shock to all of us. Because this was the best fighting unit that there ever was. And they could have been used with great success, once again on the borders of South Africa, and specifically in Kruger National Park, where we have the rhino problem. But yeah, it's the fear that the unit instilled in people's minds.
It was a political issue. And it was a wrong thing to do with the wrong information, and was a sad story. Not only disbanding the unit, but blaming the unit for something it never did.
Why they did it, I think they were terribly scared of 3-2 Battalion, because they were a force to be reckoned with.
When the disbandment came along, it was after the incidents that they had in the townships, where they were very successful, and it was a political act. The ANC just said that they will not go to the peace talks as long as this unit exists.
A lot of promises made from senior leadership within the government, within senior generals within the unit, that were given promises to, if you want to call it South Africa's French Foreign Legion, that they would be protected, they would be looked after, and their service would be respected. It wasn't.
I think it was a political one. It was a very sad moment for all the guys that have spent so much time and given up their lives for the unit.
There